Welcome back. In this video of the French defense series, we're going to look at the classical variation as well as, I believe it is referred to as the Alekhine variation. So after e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, we have the classical. Now there are two major branches in French defense theory. We have the classical, which is knight f6, and the win hour, which is bishop e4. I will not be covering bishop b4 because it is a monster requiring multiple videos in and of itself. If you're interested in playing the French defense in a very aggressive manner with this variation, I would strongly suggest checking out the video series by either Simon Williams or Tatev Abrahamian that are on chess.com. So after knight f6, there are two major moves. e5, which is the classical, and bishop g5, which I'm referring to as the Alekhine or Alekhine variation after the world champion. We need to deal with this pin, so bishop e7, e5, knight fd7, and now the further branch. If h4, you do not want to take the bishop because white gets a serious attack. It is not worth it. Simply make him go away. He attacks. Now without the bishop, we don't have to worry about as many tactics. We play c5, and we get counterplay. Anytime this knight is about to go to d6, we always look at playing f6 to make sure that knight's there temporarily. c5, looking at the e4 square, stopping the attack, getting an excellent outpost for the knight, and gradually getting play. Now, typically, this type of situation would be very, very bad for black if this pawn didn't exist. I'll just pull this over here because we cannot kick that knight out of that square. But since we have this pawn, we'll be able to make this bishop useful. So after queen e7, c5, it's clear that the bishop is able to get good. Do not trade down into a knight versus bishop endgame in the French if your bishop cannot be useful and aggressive. You will have a lost endgame every time. So that concludes that h4 variation. So now let's look at if the bishop takes immediately. It should be noted that knight b5 isn't a threat because we can simply play knight b6, kick him away, and then play c5 and get typical play. So after bishop takes e7, f4 is the main line. And this move, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of a6. We must, before playing c5, prevent the knight from coming to b5. Because if we play c5 immediately, he plays knight b5, and we cannot deal with the knight coming to d6 and c7 at the same time. That's why it's so essential to play this move a6 and then c5. And we'll just get typical play again. So d3, b5, h6, preventing the knight from coming over to g5. Trade a set of knights, getting on the long diagonal. After king h1, knight takes d3, and remember the rule again. It looks as if this bishop cannot be effective, but we have to make the bishop effective, otherwise that trade that was just made is a game-losing mistake. b4, very important, getting pawns on the opposite color of the bishop so it has good squares. Knight d1, a5, and now we see that the bishop is useful and aggressive. c8 takes, get the rook over here, and I will end this variation here because black has got a target on e5 and has a solid position. So that covers the sidelines with the early bishop g5. Now we'll take a move back and look at the e5 variations, the pure classical variation. The knight still goes to d7, and after f4, c5. And what you'll find is there's a tremendous amount of overlap between all of the French variations. And after looking through games, I specifically like a game between Karjakin and Carlsen. It was in the mid to late 2000s, to where he played this rare move, bishop e7. And it sets a trap, because in many variations of the French, white plays queen d2 and castles queenside and plays for an attack on the king side. This variation with bishop e7 goes directly against this plan, as we'll see. So if queen d2, we castle. If white decides to castle queenside, this is actually going to be black who is the aggressor here after c4. We're already beginning to prepare b5 and slam the king. So he comes after us, we go after him. We don't worry about him taking on b5 because that speeds up our attack. f6, takes, oh, not takes, but takes bishop h6 rather. King h8, sacrificing the exchange because our attack is that big on the king side. Knight takes. After queen f4, b4. And in this game, after rook c8, white tries to run away, but you cannot run. And we're beginning to see how the exchange isn't that important if the rooks can't do anything. After knight bd2, queen g7, hitting weaknesses. And this game is all about black pushing white back. Wins a pawn back, wins another pawn, check, and this game is over. White resigns. So be sure to carefully study that line with castle queenside and understand the themes of, if you wait, it is going to attack you and get a big attack. That's why that b5 pawn sacrifice is very, very strong. So let's look at one of the main variations with d takes c5. Taking with the knight, we've seen in previous variation, it continues to be good here. Castles a6. We've seen a6 and b5 in almost every variation, but in this case, we need to protect our knight, so we play b6, and later we're going to get some expansion, getting rid of that aggressive bishop, playing b5, and now f5, a move we've seen to stop f5 and get an attack, getting off the pin. And in this variation, when I first started analyzing it, I was skeptical because of the move bishop c5 and white being able to get rid of his bad bishop and our good one. But after d4, I found this variation to be quite interesting and playable for black. So after takes, after rook c8, we have bishop d5. And I believe that black has sufficient compensation due to the really excellent bishop being centralized, well posted, and attacking both wings of the board. So I think this is anybody's game, and it's definitely a playable position. So now let's look at the main line. We've looked at castle queenside and d takes c5 from this position. We have bishop e2, and after a6, castle kingside b5, a maneuver we've seen time and time again. And now, from this position, you should always be aware of the plan of continuing queenside expansion and making the bishop better. It's all about that bishop in most variations. Queen b6, adding pressure, typical move. Knight d1 to prepare c3, so we play a5, and then a4. This opens up the square for our knight, and gradually we can play b4 at our leisure, or c takes d4. We have lots of ideas here. Bishop d3 takes knight c5, stopping the attack, and then continuing to add positional pressure. f5, a move we've seen time and time again. Getting that rook over to a more effective square. He wasn't doing anything. Let's get him working. And this is just positional game where in this closed position you see how black just very carefully and instructively improves all of his pieces over time. Takes reroutes in order to play d4, sacrificing the pawn to make that bishop strong. Keep in mind, your bad bishop is always crying to get out, even if you have to give something away to do it. And now that that bishop is strong, we win an exchange. The game continues. The openness of white's king will be decisive. So, that concludes our video on the classical variation. This is going to help you be successful in using